Good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you to the 15th Annual Commonwealth Institute Leadership Luncheon. My name is Lindy Smiley.
And my name is Liz Alicea Velez. We're co-chairs of the Commonwealth Institute of South Florida.
Liz and I have been in this role together for 6 months and have been part of the TCI board for the past several years. As we were thinking about what to say today to welcome all of you to this amazing event, we came to the conclusion that we wanted to do this together because that is what TCI is all about. Although the Commonwealth Institute was founded in Boston in 1997 by a group of women entrepreneurs who met on a street called Commonwealth Avenue, hence the name, we feel there is so much more meaning to what TCI is all about. Let's take the word common first. By definition, the word common has meanings such as familiar, shared together, everyday, and garden variety. The main thing that we obviously all have in common is that we're women, of course. But after that, we are certainly not your garden variety. What you will find here is that each woman has a story, a dream, and a struggle that someone else at TCI has likely encountered. TCI is about providing a forum for women to share their hopes, their dreams, their fears, to develop themselves personally and professionally. Speaking of forums, in addition to our monthly programming, we are very proud of our executive forum, where a group of up to 10 women meet monthly and act as a personal board of directors to each other. I was part of an executive forum for 2 years. During my time in the forum, I got to know people like Lisa Kaufman, who was our previous co-chair and who currently resides on the advisory board of TCI. Lisa has an extensive background in marketing and is currently the Chief Marketing Officer for Perry Ellis. In addition, during my time with the forum, I was able to share my challenges at work, as a mother, and as a person in a safe environment. While those women listened to me, I also had the opportunity to guide them as a human resources professional by offering advice to women in small businesses or to those who ran large teams and needed unbiased advice. Here's a short video highlighting our forums.
The Executive Forum membership in particular has been an absolute lifesaver for me.
An opportunity for me to learn so much.
Sharing our stories, sharing what we need professionally.
Once you're there, once you're meeting with such smart people.
I was first a general member and I attended a couple of events and then transitioned quickly to being an Executive Forum member.
I've been in a forum since 2008, which I find to be one of the most powerful things that TCI does.
Another recent example that comes to mind is on a personal level. As you may be aware, Liz, right here, owns and operates a Huntington Learning Center in Pembroke Pines, which offers tutoring and test prep for children ages 4 to 18. I had considered moving schools for one of my children and needed advice about entrance testing. Liz was an invaluable resource and a great friend, and offered to test my child and help me develop a plan for the application process. Had it not been for my relationships within TCI, I would have not had the opportunity to connect with someone like Liz. This is just one of so many examples of benefits of joining TCI. It's not only about what the organization can do for you, but what you can do to help someone else. I have found that as we progress in our careers, we find it extremely rewarding to give back and help others on their professional journey in life. Now I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
TCI is a place where you can bounce ideas off people. What is great about it is you get different perspectives. We have business owners, CEOs, doctors, accountants, lawyers, real estate professionals, amongst many garden variety types of successful women. Now, let's get back to the definition of Commonwealth for a moment. By definition, the word wealth can mean plenitude, abundance, bunch, gobs, a slew, plateful. Well, that's certainly what we get here at TCI. We have 3 monthly programs, TCI Talks, Big Ideas Beyond the Books, and Just Ask TCI. With over 36 different programming opportunities along our signature fundraising luncheons, such as the Annual Leadership Luncheon today, as well as our top women luncheons in the spring of each year. Over the past few years, we've also expanded our initiatives and outreach to high potential emerging leaders. You may have heard about our development program for this segment, Strategies for Success. It is comprised of 4-day sessions focused on career and personal development, facilitated by experts. In addition, if you're not a TCI member, now's the opportunity to become one by simply filling out the form of the membership card that's at the middle of your table. In closing, programs like today don't happen without supportive sponsors. Please join me in offering a sincere thanks to our program partners, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and U.S. Trust. Let's give them a hand. We've also have contributors such as Carnival Cruise Lines, the Miller Family Foundation, and Ryder. And we also have supporters such as Kaufman Ross and Kempner Communications. And as you can see, and our generous friend-level sponsors, which are scrolling up on the screen in the presentation and in the program in your seats. Additionally, events like today and throughout the year would not be possible without the leadership and hard work of our board. Can our board stand up, please? Thank you so much for all you do, guys. And then we have a very small but mighty staff in Lori K. Davis, our executive director, and Katie Doyle, our program and membership members. They do a fantastic job for us every day. Okay, a few housekeeping points. Please take out your phones, check into social media, post photos and thoughts of your event, of the event today, using the hashtags that's going to be listed on the screen. But then please silence them. Okay, so we have until 1:30 to bid on the silent auction. The last bid I saw was for $3,000. A week in Tuscany would be a fabulous vacation. So if anyone wants to make another bid on that, please go to the back and make that bid. $3,000 is a real bargain. It closes at 1:30. Again, we thank you for joining us today and hope you will be part of the Commonwealth Institute's community of women. Enjoy the event, and thank you so much for coming. And now, can I have Laura Kaplan to come up to introduce our speaker?
I'm wondering if we should have Katie and Meredith come up here at this time, too. Okay. As I'm speaking. Okay. So on behalf of Bank of America, U.S. Trust, and Merrill Lynch, I first wanted to thank TCI and all of you for the opportunity to be your sponsor today. We are a firm, as most of you know, committed to women, as women are not only the fastest growing emerging market in the world, but an integral fabric of the communities that we all serve. So with me today are several great women from our firm as well, and I just Cynthia Desi, and one of our longtime board members, Diane Davis, who also served as our president for 3 years. Thank you, Diane. Gianara Cifuentes from the Commercial Bank. So to all of you amazing women who I know are committed to making the financial lives of all of your clients better, I want to say thank you. So now, if you'll allow me to introduce two amazing women to my left. I'm going to first introduce Katie Kempner, who's going to introduce Meredith in a moment, or interview Meredith. Katie Kempner, I think as many of you know, is the founder of Kempner Communications. Kempner Communications is a high-end consultancy firm specializing in creative and corporate communications, reputation and brand management, crisis communication, media training, content creation. Really, if there's anything that you need to do in the world of media and have your brand worked on, it's Katie. So Katie is amazing. And she's also clearly an entrepreneur because she's also the creator and host of a really amazing program you can find on Amazon and soon on the web as well, called Perspectives of Katie with Katie Kempner, which is a long-running digital series that focuses on successful working women balancing busy lives. And if you look at the last 6 speakers that we've had here at TCI at this luncheon, I think all of them have come from Katie and the women she's interviewed. So Meredith, you join good company, and actually I think many of them are Meredith's friends. Katie has produced Perspectives in partnership with TED Women, the Cannes Lion Festival, Advertising Week, et cetera, et cetera. So a frequent industry speaker, moderator, and host, Katie is an occasional blogger for the Huffington Post. She's a graduate of our own University of Miami, lives in Miami Beach with her husband, 2 dogs, and is every working woman balancing with 2 kids when they're also home from college. So I know it's hard to believe, but we have this amazing entrepreneurial woman here with us, Katie Kempner. In addition, there is so much to say about the amazing Meredith Kopit Levien here to my left. Inside your brochure, in the inside cover, our program today is a really extensive background on Meredith. But what I'd like to say is a few things about her. First, she's the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the New York Times Company since June 2017. She has been in numerous leadership positions. Currently, she's responsible for digital product design, audience and brand, consumer revenue. She has been the Chief Revenue Officer of companies. She's been head of advertising. When Katie interviews her, you will get the entire story. But one thing that I found amazing is, we were just talking earlier, she actually is a Henry Crown Fellow from the Aspen Institute, the class of 2016, which, if you look it up, it's an amazingly prestigious fellowship. And she had the opportunity to pick one venture to change the world, and I love this, Meredith. I'm not going to get it perfectly right, but she gathered the world's free press on Free Press Day together, and they encouraged the world to read more, watch more, and listen more. So if I can, I guess Meredith will tell us more about that in a minute, but message for all of you, Free Press Day is coming up, and you'll see a big advertisement, and it's all because of this Meredith here on our left. Last but not least, we were talking about connections to Miami, and you'll hear from Meredith in a moment about her husband, but they spent many years here at the Flamingo Hotel. You don't have to tell us what happened there. But we will tell you that she vacationed in Miami Beach, and so Miami is very near and dear to her heart. So without further ado, and giving away too much information, I'm going to pass it over to Meredith. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice lunch.
Perfect. Hello. Thank you so much for that great introduction. That sounded really good. And so it's been such a pleasure to be a part of these talks for the last 6 years, and I'm really thrilled today to be talking with Meredith, and she's an incredible person. We were trying to figure out how long we've known each other, but a long time. But it's been such an honor to watch her very quick trajectory and let's talk about it. So why don't we talk a little bit, just to start, about your role at the New York Times now?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. I want to first say thank you so much for that really beautiful introduction, and thank you, Katie, for asking me to come. And a big thank you to all of you. I was thinking this morning, my colleague Lauren Funke from The Times, who lives and works down here, picked me up, and I said to her, it's such a treat to be here today. I love South Florida. I particularly love Miami. I never enjoy myself more than when I am in a giant room full of women. I wish I always felt like I feel when I'm in a room full of women. So it's just a complete joy and privilege to be here. And I'm so grateful that people want to hear about our work at the New York Times. So thank you so much. And I just want to say I'm so grateful to whoever made those centerpieces. Look at the centerpieces. I love that. Awesome. It's the New York Times, like, in action. Sorry, there was a question in that. What do I do at the Times?
What do you do at the
Yes.
Times?
So let me answer the real question. So the team that I work with at the Times says about our work, we have one objective, and it's to make millions more people spend much more time with quality journalism. And we do that. We do that in lots of different ways. Thank you. I think that's a good use of time in this world, and we basically do that three ways: by helping express the distinctiveness of the work that the journalists at the New York Times do, and I can talk more about that if that's interesting. We do it by making our digital products more compelling in and of themselves. I often say, how do we make our digital products, our apps and our websites, as addictive and unrivaled as the journalism? And it's about helping the world change its own consciousness around the power and importance of journalism.
Well, the power and importance of journalism, I think, is never more important than it is right now, especially if you look at the current media landscape and the New York Times' role in it. We'd love to just hear your feelings on where media is right now and where the New York Times fits in there.
Yeah, that's a big question. I'll start on. I do think we're living in a moment where the public consciousness for journalism is pretty high. And it's high for some reasons that aren't so great. It's high because journalism, there's name calling, there's journalism as people are made to feel a particular way about journalism, but it's also high because the work's never been more important, and people are recognizing that. And I think the Times has long considered itself, and been considered by many, one of the standard bearers of the work of journalism. So how we do our work, the level of commitment that's required to ensure that we have reporters on the ground where things are unfolding, to ensure that we have editors who are able to assign coverage and help shape the body of work, shape stories, that we have fact checkers, that we have photographers. For a very long time, the New York Times has played a role helping shape how that should go. And I think we continue to play that role. What I think has been particularly interesting over the last, I would say, half dozen years, for much of our life as a news organization, we did what I just described without a lot of having to think about the business model, because we had a distribution monopoly for a lot of our work. And I would say in the last decade, journalism itself has been under terrible economic pressure, and the business model for journalism has been under a lot of pressure. And so now I think the Times also has a role in helping to innovate in how we do the business of journalism. And that's a lot of what my team is working on.
Because there's really two sides of it. It's the journalism, the integrity of the journalism, and figuring out the new role of media. Well, let's talk a little bit about the role. I'd love to dive into both, but let's talk a little bit about the role that the New York Times has played in the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
and with women? Because I think that is something we'd all love to hear your point of view on.
Yeah, I can't talk about the Me Too movement without talking about what it was like to be at the New York Times in, I guess it was late October of 2017, when Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey published their first story about Harvey Weinstein. It was extraordinary to see what the work of reporters and editors and that whole craft that I just described could do to actually give voice to these women who had undergone all this unbelievably awful stuff. So it was a moment of really sort of processing the kind of cultural reckoning that can come about when a light is shined on things. So that was incredibly important. And of course, across the last year, we've seen many bad actors be taken to task for what they've done. And I think we're going to continue to see that for a while. But to me, the as if not more important thing that's happening is there seems to be much more attention being paid to how we got there to begin with, how we got to a world in which that kind of harassment could go on. And a big part of how we got there was a lack of diversity and inclusion in the leadership teams of companies, on the boards of companies, and through the ranks, and a lack of inclusive behavior in how the work got done. And so I'll say two things about what has changed just even at the Times as a company since the Weinstein story and all the work that unfolded after that. The first one is we are conscious every day now at a level that I've always believed myself to be someone who's been conscious of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I understand it at a whole different level now. I think that will keep improving and unfolding, and I would say the same of my colleagues. And there isn't a forum or a team or a project or a body of work where we aren't thinking, who's around this table? Do we have a sufficiently diverse mix of people and backgrounds and perspectives around this table? We don't always get it right, but we are working our tail off to get it right. And how does the work unfold? Are we actually enabling an environment sufficiently inclusive to allow people to sort of bring their best selves to work? And this is an endeavor that I think we're going to keep getting better at, and I think many companies are more conscious than they were before. They're at the beginning of getting better at it, and there's a lot more work to do.
On the business side and on the journalism side, I had a conversation, I guess when we were in Cannes, with David Gellis, who took over from Adam Bryant, who writes the corner office piece in the Sunday New York Times, and he was saying how it is his mission to make sure that the CEOs that he interviews are diverse. Because before, even though Adam did an amazing job, it was a little more reflective of many white males. So it's great to see that happening on the content side as well.
I'll say something about both Adam Bryant and David Gellis. So Adam Bryant was the founder of the Corner Office column. David Gellis has picked it up and sort of reimagined it, and both have done an extraordinary job. I think what's happening is that the cultural reckoning around Me Too was one giant force that changed the world of business. The idea that we can no longer kind of keep politics at an arm's length from business is changing the world of business. The fact that technology is sort of changing the way work works faster than many of us have the capacity to adapt, or people and teams and companies can adapt. And then just the idea that there are 4, and in some cases 5 generations of people in the workplace now for the first time ever at the same time, all of that means the expectations of leaders and the work of leaders is a fundamentally different thing. And I think David Gellis is doing a very good job of capturing that.
I'm ready for him to profile some of my clients. No. So in this vein of Me Too and politics, I mean, this has been an incredibly historic week for women, right? Did you say 21? 121?
I think 100, I may not get this right, but 121 women going to Washington, to the House and the Senate as of this week. Awesome.
Awesome.
Like my happiest day on, like, just looking at the news, your Instagram feed, like, amazing. And still not enough. That's still what, a fifth of Congress? A fifth of the whole thing? Not enough.
As a woman, as a female business leader in a pretty male-dominated field, how does this all make you feel?
Yeah, I was saying to someone before we came in the room in one of the conversations I had outside that for the first time in my life, so I'm in my late 40s, and I feel like I've been in rooms full of people talking about more equality in the workplace for quite a long time. And it always felt important to talk about. This moment feels quite different. It feels like companies, leaders, society has to do much more than talking, and the measure of how we do as leaders will be of our actions to bring about more diverse teams, more equality in leadership, and a more inclusive work environment that lets people bring their best selves to work. So I want to say, I mean, as a leader of a company that employs almost 4,000 people, this is now high. This is frontal lobe for how we do our work every day. It's not a thing that we're doing on the sidelines. It's literally in the how we hire, how we staff, how the work unfolds, and I think that's quite different. So I'm optimistic. I want it to go faster, but I'm optimistic that we are in a real moment of change in the world. I think our children are going to grow up in a different world.
I do too, and it's phenomenal. Are there any tips, though, because there's so many people here that are in charge of hiring decisions that you're doing at the Times that could be useful when it comes to diversity?
I would say the interest in it and the action around it must be present at the very top of the company. So we have a publisher, the New York Times, A.G. Sulzberger, who's 37, took over for his father about a year ago. We have a CEO, my boss, Mark Thompson, who believe they are in charge of this issue. They don't think our HR department is in charge of this issue. They think they are, which means they think we are. And that ethic goes down to every leader at the company. So I think it's got to start at the top. I think to the extent that you can communicate transparently and often about it, I think you should be doing that. We released for the first time our own data about the diversity of our team. And that data shows that we still have a lot of work to do at the New York Times. We have a lot of work to do on gender parity in leadership. We have even more work to do on parity for people of color in leadership and at the Times generally. But actually putting that out in the world helps hold us accountable. So I think you've got to communicate a lot, and you've got to be transparent. And then I'll say one more time, because I think it's so important and it's still unfolding. It's got to be in the how you do your work. So we've done a lot, actually, before Me Too. We've been doing a lot for a long time about diversity in hiring. And that means having diverse interviewer slates and diverse candidate slates. And I think we've made good strides. We're still not everywhere we want to be, but good strides in that. But the inclusion part is even more important, which is how does it feel when you come to work at the New York Times? And how does it feel when you sit in a meeting at the New York Times? And how does it feel when you're put on a task force or on an objective-based mission team? Do you feel like you can bring your whole self and your best self there, whatever age you are, wherever you come from, whatever your politics might be, and so on down the line? And we are really working on that and learning as we go.
So before we move off talking about the New York Times, you mentioned, and it's true, I mean, the New York Times and newspapers as a whole are facing such incredible challenges. Are there some things that you're doing that you can talk with us about, to modernize things?
Yeah, I love that question. That's what all the gray hair and wrinkles comes from. I would say that, most of what has happened in journalism in the transformation from print to digital to, mobile and what I call sort of ambient content when you're just asking Alexa what happened overnight, or to play the daily, or to tell you about what's going on in Yemen. I think in that transformation, so much of what happened to media organizations is facsimiles were created. So, the desktop web was kind of a facsimile of the newspaper, and then the mobile was a facsimile of digital. And the reality is the way people behave, the way people use these devices, the way the technology presents in their lives means their consumption patterns are fundamentally changing. So we are racing to really understand how a person's life is different, and what role news and high quality journalism and recipes and parenting advice and crossword puzzles and all the things that the New York Times does should play in their lives. And it means working really hard to think about, what we do in audio or with voice. It has to come from the same idea of quality journalism, but the manner in which somebody uses it is quite different. So we're thinking very hard about that. I mentioned to Katie, and I will say to everybody in the room, we're also thinking about the other ways we can play a role in people's lives that other things do today. So today, a lot of people wake up and they put on morning television still while they're getting dressed. And, we want you to ask Google Home or ask Alexa to play The Daily in the morning, which is our daily audio show that gives you one big story that's unfolding in the world in real time. We're making a television show that we've just sold for distribution. It'll launch early next year to FX and Hulu, called The Weekly, where we'll show you our journalists in the field on the biggest stories that they're covering. And we believe that journalism can play more of a role in people's lives, and I would say that's the work. I'll say one other thing that we're working on is showing people how we do what we do. How many people here listen to The Daily, which is our audio show, or watched The Fourth Estate on Showtime? Okay, so a decent number of people. The Fourth Estate was a documentary that Showtime made about a year of covering Trump in the Times newsroom. And what I would say is, if you actually watched that 4-part series and you saw the lengths that our reporters and editors and the whole journalistic team went through to be fair and considered in their coverage, you would think quite differently about journalism. So a lot of what we're trying to do is just show the work, because we think that makes people understand, appreciate, and want more journalism.
And you talk about high quality journalism, and I think so many people today, you can Google something and find something, and that's not necessarily a fact. And there needs to be more than ever places that are trusted quality places, and there's less and less of that.
Yeah, I think, for the last 20 years, basically, maybe decades since the launch of the Facebook news feed, much of how people experienced news was literally at the atomic unit of a story, often disassociated from the organization that paid someone to create that story, sometimes often disassociated from any context around that story. And with that, we've all seen what can happen, the fake news crisis, the demise of the economic models for journalism. So I think we are returning as a society to an understanding of the importance of news as a relationship business, one in which, you know, the reader, the listener, the watcher can know that their time is going to be well spent on sort of true and worthwhile things, and where the creator of the journalism has sufficient resources to do something great.
So the New York Times, the media, the newspaper media, well, I guess saying newspaper makes it way too small than what it is, but you've gone through so many changes, you've had so many challenges. As a leader in a business that is constantly facing challenges, are there certain lessons or rules that you go by that would be applicable to other businesses facing challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I would say everyone in the room is, living in the same conditions we are living in at the New York Times, which is like radical transformation of how everything works because of technology. And what I would say there, we're learning in real time, probably the biggest lesson is that business transformation, business model transformation isn't a moment in time. It's kind of an operating model. You don't just do it once. You have to do it over and over again. And there are two implications of that. One is you need a team that is kind of up for constant change and up for constantly being able to understand what's going on the outside and move the business accordingly. The second really important thing that we've found is you actually have to know what you can't change. You have to know what are the immutables, and that list has to be a really, really, really small thing. You have to have a really small number of things that you're unwilling to change. At the Times, we spent a lot of time early in my tenure there kind of defining the things that we couldn't break, that we couldn't mess with. And basically, it was the independence of the journalism, the idea that we do our work without any fear or favor to politics or commercial interests or anyone in power. It was the idea that we seek the truth in service to helping people understand the world. And it was the idea that we direct attention to things that matter. And otherwise, everything else is up for grabs in terms of change.
So is your mission, making sure you understood your mission?
Know the mission and literally like define it as narrowly as you possibly can, because ultimately your growth is going to come from variety, from doing new things, from bringing your product, your idea, your mission to the world in new and very different ways.
So sometimes in organizations, it's easy for the very high, the C-level people or maybe right below to know the mission and understand where they're marching. What are some of the things that you've been able to do to make sure that everyone in the organization is going in the same way? Because it seems like you've done a terrific job of that at the Times.
I don't think any of the people I mentioned, myself, our CEO, our publisher, I don't think we can actually take credit for the deep understanding inside the Times for the mission, because we have almost 4,000 people. They all are there for the mission. I tell people I feel on day 1800 at the New York Times the same butterflies of excitement in my stomach when I walk in the morning that I felt the day I came for my interview, because the mission is just so goddamn important in the world, and everyone feels that way. That's why you show up to work there. But what we've had to do is almost the opposite of what most companies have to do, which is we assumed for a very long time that mission and the values that shape it, quality, original, independent journalism, the commitment, resources, and expertise that have to go into it were actually well understood in the world. And you know what? They weren't. And so we've had to figure out how to be very explicit about those values, which means, the New York Times is now pretty sizable brand advertiser. You know, the New York Times is making a television show to show our work. And we're doing that because even though, you know, like we probably have 100% brand recognition all over the world, but even with that, that doesn't mean people understand what our values are. It doesn't mean the thing that's going to make them feel a connection or have affinity is obvious, and we have to be explicit about that.
So you mentioned, you just said in passing when you were answering that question, when you went for your interview at the New York Times. So that kind of feels like a good segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is just, you've had this very rapid, exciting rise in your career.
It's 25 years, it's not so rapid.
Well, it's
I don't think I can say that anymore.
But can you take us through your career a little bit and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, the short version is that I haven't worked, I've only worked for a small handful of people, owners of businesses. You know, broadly, I often worked for many people below them, but it's been I've only worked at a small handful of places, and I have been so lucky to work for extraordinary owners of companies, extraordinary people. I spent 10 and a half years working for a man named David Bradley, who owned a very successful business best practices research firm that I started working for him in, and then ultimately bought The Atlantic and bought and built a bunch of media businesses, and that's how I got into media. I worked for the Forbes family for 5.5 years, an extraordinary family and owners who really cared about their brand, their business, and their people. And now I work for the Sulzberger family, and I would say of that family and the board of that company, I'd say this of all three, these are mission-driven places. I've been lucky to work for extraordinary people who took an interest in their people, and I was one of the beneficiaries of that. I have been lucky or deliberate, I'm not sure which, probably mostly the first, and now the first for most of my career, now the latter, to work in a space that I just care so much about. Like, I had an opportunity because of this fellowship I was doing, as Laura just described, to launch a venture in the world to bend the curve on a problem. And the problem I was most interested in working on was changing the public consciousness around the power and importance of independent journalism in the world. So I just love the space. And then I want to say, I just love to work. So, you know, I have like almost a romantic relationship with work. Like and for a long time in my life, particularly I would say between 30 and 40, I didn't know how to square that with being a woman, with being a person, with being a family member, with being a friend. And the older I got, the more I realized this is just who I am, and I need to stop apologizing for loving to work. I need to stop apologizing for thinking it's fun. And I think that's been a big part of my formula. I will also say thank you. I am even more passionate about being a mother to my 7-year-old, who I had late in life and fought really hard to have. And for me, squaring those two things, being good at both of them, is really hard. Really, really hard. And I think anyone who's saying otherwise and who's really into one or the other or both isn't telling the truth.
Let's talk about that, because now this is my favorite subject, balance or squaring away, or however you want to talk about it. So what are some of the things that you do to sort of make time for everything in a way that makes sense to you?
I harbor no illusion that I can make time for everything. And none of us can, really. And so I would say I'm really clear. I wouldn't have said this a decade ago, but probably since becoming since my son was a toddler, I have become really clear that I want to have a happy child, and I think a happy child and a loving relationship with my son. I want to raise a happy person and a well-adjusted person, and I think that having a really present set of parents is incredibly important for that. It's hard to say this without being emotional. And that requires time and effort and being home at a certain time and putting the phone down when I'm home. And for me, like, that is hard to do. And I would say particularly in the last 4 years, 3 years even, I've just been relentless about that. Katie asked me to come speak here twice before. I said no, and I basically said no because, like, I just don't do overnight, and I don't go out at night, and I don't, that is my time with my child. And I would say I'm the same way about work. I am really clear that I love working, leading people, working on problems I care about in teams of people. And I know that that means, I also have hobbies, and I like to cook, and I like to run, and I just don't do those other things very much. And I am finally, I can say in this room, I'm at peace with the other stuff. I'd like to run 5 days a week. I can't, I don't. I run as much as I can. I wear Spanx for the other parts.
I think that's really important that you say that, because a lot of times people listen to a really successful woman speaking and talking about all the things they do, and they have a child, and you also have a lovely marriage and a handsome and successful husband, and it sounds like, oh, well, come on. And I think it's important for women to say to other women, this isn't easy. And if you make it look like it's easy, but that doesn't mean it is easy.
I don't even make it look like it's easy.
No, I think you do, actually.
My boss, who has just been like the greatest sponsor of my career, the CEO of the New York Times, Mark Thompson, always says, I don't want you to work less. I just want you to look like you're working less.
Has he elaborated on that? I want to ask you just one more question, and then we'll move off of this. But I speak with a lot of women that say, in terms of being able to do what you're saying, which is being very present in their personal life and also working really hard at work, they have a technique. Either they get home and they disconnect and they put their phone away, which you mentioned you do, and then their kid goes to bed and they look again, or, in this world of always being expected to be on every second, and I would think especially in the media, how do you handle your relationship with technology?
That's a great question. I'll broaden it slightly to say I have two things that I've just been like deliberate about. One is I wake up really, really early in the morning. So I get up now, sometimes at 4:30, means I go to bed early. I go to bed when my son goes to bed, 9 or 9:30, and I get up at 4:30 or 5, and a few days a week, one or two, I go for a run if I can get my nanny to come really early. But I get up really early, and I have a good hour, sometimes hour and a half before my son wakes up in the morning to do my think work and to read. And a lot of that, a lot of my work is helping our teams think through the digital product advancement of the New York Times. So I spend a lot of time reading other people's journalism and entertainment content and on other people's apps, and I spend a lot of time reading about just what's going on in the world of consumer behavior. And I do that really early in the morning. And I'm sort of proud and embarrassed at the same time to say 7 days a week. Like, I go to bed, maybe one night I stay up late, but I go to bed really early and I wake up really early in the morning, 7 days a week. And that makes a difference. And the other thing is I'm in my house by 7:15, 7:20 at night. Probably sounds late to a lot of people. The device goes away. We play board games. Like, we do things that just cannot require a device. And we do it till 9:15, 9:30, go to bed.
I think that's great. Everybody thinks
it's taken me a lifetime to be able to say that.
Yeah. So I guess I want to move on a little bit now and just ask you, well, actually, no, I want to ask you one quick thing before we move on, because you said your think work early in the morning. And we were talking before, and you said you think that a lot of people don't spend enough time thinking. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say if there's been a key to my career and ability to take on more and get bigger and bigger jobs, it's been action. So I'm an activist in my soul. I'm a person of action. I like to create action. I like to move people to action. What that comes at the expense of is being perceived as sufficiently thoughtful. And that's feedback I've gotten sort of consistently across my career. And I'm in a moment now where I'm working really hard at trying to have space to be thoughtful. And that cuts two ways. One is really giving time and energy to understanding the higher context in which your business or your life, but in my case, the business is operating, and spending time on that and creating the space to like really read and think and listen and process. And the second one is really creating the space to listen to other people. I think I've not been as great at that in my life and in my career as I want to be, and as I think a leader needs to be. And I'm working really hard now at listening and trying to practice more active listening. And there was a really big change for me. I hired, when I got my first really big job at the Times, I became Chief Revenue Officer 4.5 years ago, and they got me a coach. And the coach said, you have to hire a chief of staff, and here's the person you're going to hire. And I was like, I don't want to hire that person. Like, I don't even think she likes me, and I don't want to hire her. And the reality was, she was this brilliant introvert. She now has 100 people who work for her, runs a huge part of our ad business, is like one of the most ascendant talents at the New York Times. But I had this deeply introverted, brilliant person come work with me, and it just totally changed my perception of how people's value is realized and understood at work. And loudmouths like me, who are so easy to talk and can get in your face and, we can ask the question, but maybe not listen enough. Extroverts often don't, or at least I didn't understand. Other people need other venues to be heard, and I'm super conscious of that now.
So you have to do all those things, but it also, what you're saying reminds me of something. Last week, I was in New York and I interviewed Anna Bagger. Do you know her?
She's lovely.
Isn't she great? She's a vice president of the IAB, which is the Interactive Advertising Bureau, and she has a really big job, and she's beautiful and lovely and super, super smart. And she was saying something that in her career, she always was trying to make sure that everybody liked her. And even as she got higher and higher in her career, it was really important for her, for people to like her. And so she wasn't always making the right decisions because she wanted to be liked. She said, I need people to respect me, and of course I prefer if they like me, but that's no longer how I approach things. Can you talk about that a little bit? Do you agree with her?
Yeah, I think most people, I don't think this is just women. I think most people want to be liked. Who doesn't want to be liked? And it's the leadership is a lonely endeavor in many instances. And there are days that I go home, I think of myself as having, I have, I think now 7 direct reports. Those are my 7 bosses. And there are days I go home and I tell my husband or I tell someone that all 7 of my bosses want to fire me today. They're all mad at me, so it stinks not to be liked, but I think I'm arriving at a slightly broader context on that, which is you don't want to be liked, you want to be loved. And the way to be loved is to actually be of real value to other people. And the way to be of real value to other people is to use their time well, to tell them the truth even when they don't want to hear it, and to be direct. And I'm on a journey to getting better at that.
So I don't think this is exactly what you mean in terms of mentorship, but you talked about that you've only worked with a handful of companies, really interesting companies that you stayed with a while, and how to add value to the people that you work with. How important do you think, and I'm sure everyone here would like to know that because this is an organization that is very invested in mentorship, is it to have a mentor?
I think it's so important. And I think it's so important to have sponsors. And I want to say I've had, like 4, I've basically had, I've had a few more, but like 4 really materially important bosses in my life, 3 men and a woman. They have all mentored me, pushed me, told me the truth, told me when I sucked, made me better, really. I mean, all four of these people one is my current boss, who I literally like sit in a cube next to, and I spend lots of time with. These are people who have cared for me by pushing me to be better, by making me see the bad parts, by celebrating when things go well. And I think that really, really matters. The thing I want to say to everybody in the room, though, is that equally, I've been mentored by and maybe there are different words for it, but I've been mentored and shepherded and coached and made better by the community of people around me, both men and women, but primarily women. And I want to say that Katie and I were talking about this with my colleague Lauren earlier. I feel like I travel in a group of women who've come up in the ad business, in marketing, in the media business together, and it's almost like this giant unseen ring of arms linking and helping one another. I heard Shelley Zalis was on this stage last year. I could spend an hour talking about what Shelley Zalis has done for me and my career. Sarah Rabo-Hagan was here. Sarah and I would both talk at great length about what we've done for one another. I've already recommended your speaker for next year, who is 34, and I would say she's mentoring me every day. So I think it doesn't have to be your boss. It doesn't have to be someone at your company. It doesn't have to be someone who has power over your career, but you do need help. We all need it. And I have found that my career would be nowhere if I hadn't had a lot of it.
So, when Sarah Rabo-Hagan was here several years ago, she gave us a really interesting story about a mistake that she made in her career that really taught her something. Are there any mistakes that you made along the way that really taught you a lesson that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I made so many mistakes, and I've talked about some of them here. I think that you are what your calendar, you are professionally what your calendar says you are doing. You are nothing more than that. And it wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years ago that I even understood that. So I would say I spent a lot of time in my career doing things that seemed important and were in some venue, but weren't the most important thing. And because I am willing to put in a lot of time, that generally didn't hurt me at work, but what it did was sap my energy, make me need to just crash out on the weekends and not, or need to write a speech or, live up to a commitment I had made at work. It made it so I really couldn't do that work and family part in a very present way. And I think that cost me something real as a mother. And I think it cost me something real as an executive because I missed that thought space. And I'm working really hard on being different now.
So I know everyone has a lot of questions, and I'd just like to end our part of the conversation with one final one, which I think you know what it is. But if you have one piece of advice that you could share with us that's helped guide you through your life and career, what is it?
I spent 10 and a half years working for a man named David Bradley, who just sold a 70% stake in The Atlantic to Lorraine Powell Jobs. He ran a think tank before that. And he taught me, I literally went to work at his company, at his think tank, a few weeks after college. And they had 2 principles, both of which have stuck with me, but the second have guided my whole career, that everyone they hired would have to have what he called the force of ideas, which basically meant someone who could do original insight and have original insight. And the second one, which is the one that really shaped my career, is a spirit of generosity. And what he meant by spirit of generosity is that work, if you boil it down to like the most reductive thing, it is just serving others. It is service. And the higher up you go, and the bigger your title is, and your paycheck is, and your office is, although now we all have cubicles as executives, but the higher you go, the more leadership is a servant endeavor. And literally think of the people who work for you as the most important bosses that you have, and you'll love your work a hell of a lot more.
That was a great one. It's been amazing, but I don't want to hog all your attention because I know people probably have questions for you. So does anyone have a question for Meredith?
I have a mic here. I was just curious if you could talk about the relationship, or I guess the competition with the Washington Post. I've noticed that now with their new owner, and since 2016, I really go back and forth between reading both of your publications.
Thank you for doing that. I grew up in Virginia, so I grew up in a Washington Post house. I did not grow up in a New York Times house. And we literally were so, in college, my roommate and I were like proud that we got the Washington Post delivered as a paper every day to our college apartment. We thought that said something about who we were. So I believe strongly in the Post. I had just started at the New York Times when the news broke that the Graham family had sold the Post to Jeff Bezos. It was so secretive that even the Sulzbergers didn't know. And I think that has been really, really good broadly for journalism. I think the best work in journalism in the last 2 years has been done by companies like the Times and the Post, companies not born of the digital age, and in many cases that have a history in ink. So I think that is generally a very, very good thing. And a good, we are trying to make a market for journalism worth paying for, and you don't make a market with one company. So I think multiple companies doing extraordinary work will enable that first thing I said, which is making millions more people spend much more time with journalism. I do want to say of the Times and of our particular ownership structure that one of the great things about the New York Times is we're relevant on nearly every story, in nearly every category. And that breadth, I think, is really going to matter in a time in the world when serious journalism companies are under a lot of economic pressure. I think there will only be some number of them that can have that breadth. And our ownership structure, we are a family-controlled public company where the family, Sulzberger family, their business is the business of the New York Times. It's the business of journalism. And I think that makes for the most independent journalism that you can have. They don't have any other interest but that.
I think there was a question over here. Oh.
Characters or a soundbite.
Yeah. I think people do read in depth. We did this story about a month ago, this tragic story written by Dave Barry, who writes for the Metro section of the New York Times, called Jane Doe Ponytail. It was thousands and thousands of words about a Chinese woman who had immigrated to the United States and essentially was caught up in a prostitution sting operation and either committed suicide or was killed because of that operation. Absolutely tragic story that got at what it means to be an immigrant in America, that got at what life in New York is like, that got at gender equality, and so many other issues. That story was probably the longest story we did in that month, and it had 5 times the readership of the average New York Times story digitally. And when we do a big story, millions and millions of people read it. And on smartphones, it had twice as much readership. So I just don't buy it that people don't read deeply. I think we are probably at peak content in the world, but we are not at peak great content. And I think, there's more than enough content. There isn't enough high quality original content that exposes you to something you wouldn't have otherwise known or makes you think or feel differently.
Dave Barry's a Miami guy, Any other questions for Meredith?
Hi, I'm also a Meredith. I'm wondering how you dealt, we talk about the Me Too movement and people being, I think, keeping in their forefront how to work with diverse groups. But do you deal with what I'll call sort of legacy executives in your tenure at the Times or other places who maybe aren't as forward thinking? And how do you sort of bring that conversation to light in a way that doesn't offend their position?
Hi, Meredith. So, the question is, how do you deal essentially with, those who have been in power for a long time and came up in a world where the circumstances didn't require power sharing across a diverse group of people, I think is really what you're getting at. Real presence for the diversity and inclusion conversation at the very top of the organization by men and women, by white people and people of color, by people in their 60s and people in their 20s, and on and on. I think the hard thing, so we deal with it by talking about it a lot and showing action a lot, and as I said, being public about our own data to be held to account by the world and to hold ourselves to account. I think there's an underlying question that you may be getting at, which is, how do you make people feel comfortable talking about it? And I do think creating a forum where men are part of the discussion is really, really important. I think that everyone's understanding is unfolding in this moment. I am a late 40s woman who feels that I have been for gender equality and inclusion my entire career, and I, in this moment, am learning about how to behave in a way that is more inclusive or how to bring others into the mix. So I think everyone can learn, and I think whoever is running the conversation has to bring humility to the conversation so that the people, those who may feel as though they're losing something or threatened in some way or may say the wrong thing can express that and be part of the mix. And I think fairness, what we're trying to get at in all this is fairness. And fairness applies to men too.
So I think we would have time for one more question if anyone has one.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm a professor at the University of Miami Business School, and most of my students, they already dream about having a leadership position once they enter the workforce. So my question for you will be, what advice can you give young professionals so that they can distinguish themselves in the workforce, especially early in their career?
Yeah, it's all about what you do. So make something, do something, start something. It is never, it's such a myth that it's about who you know or the circles you travel in. It is about what you do and what you're capable of doing. And I think the great unlock, I said a little bit of this before, but I want to say more about it. I think the great unlock in the workforce of the future is you have to be able to make and do, and you also have to be able to do that in regard to other functional disciplines, in deep regard to other functional disciplines that aren't the one you came up in. So engineers need to speak the language of marketers, and marketers need to speak the language of product managers, and product managers need to speak the language of data scientists, and so forth. And those who can make and do, and frankly, share their power, recognize that you cannot make or do at scale without the talents and the skills of other people. You have to be able to do it. Those who can't will not make it in this workforce, and those who do, I think, will be the next leaders.
Yay. So I know Lori's going to come up and give you an official thanks, but from all of us, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's so much fun. Thank you, Katie.
So I just want to again, is that on? I'm Lori K. Davis, the Executive Director of the Commonwealth Institute, and I've been fortunate to serve with you guys for the past 5.5 years. And wasn't this an amazing afternoon? I want to thank Meredith. For Meredith got here at, I heard 1:30 last night, and she's here and did an incredible job. And Katie, my dear friend, for bringing Meredith here. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. A great big round of applause. So since 2015, America's made almost no progress in improving women's representation in the workplace, according to the Lean-In survey. Only 1 in 5 business leaders is a woman. I invite you all to join us in the journey to change that statistic. And this is a little housekeeping, and then we're all going to go back to work or home. It's Friday. I want to call attention to this card on your table. It's our donation card. You have an opportunity. You can also give this to us on your way out. You can join TCI. We've had over 15 not-for-profits this past year go through our programs, and you heard a lot about our programs earlier from our co-chairs. You can donate to those programs as well. You also, we hope that we want to be able to sustain these scholarships, and we also want to be able to expand. Lindy talked about our executive forums. We mentioned for C-suite executive, senior executive women, business owners, and not-for-profit leaders. Just as an FYI on this and out there, anyone applying to a CEO forum and being accepted, apply by November 15th, you get a 1-hour executive coaching session with Lindy. So Lindy's offered that up, and don't forget, also before I move on, Lee Olson donated our centerpieces. Thank you, Lee. And you can take those home for a $20 donation. Yes, we're a not-for-profit, and we are always looking to monetize everything that we can so that we can continue to bring incredible programs to you guys. I hope you noticed on our PowerPoint that the scrolling on the screen some of the upcoming events, sponsorship opportunities, and hostings. We're constantly working on our programming. It's important that we're always developing personally, professionally. And one of our programs, Leaders Read, yes, they do, just like Meredith talked about. Every morning she's reading. We do a program for reading, that we read a book or discuss the topic. And we invite you, if you're not already a member, to come as our guest and experience what we do firsthand. Thank you again, Meredith and Katie, for not only bringing Meredith, but for helping Meredith tell her story. You're a true visionary in the media world, really. And lastly, thank you to our amazing sponsors in this room. Special thank you to our board, who were recognized earlier. My program and membership manager, who's never in the room when our co-chairs get to acknowledge her. Katie, I couldn't do any of this without you. She keeps us organized. And our wonderful group of volunteers. So final couple of notes. The silent auction, the Tuscany Stay. Our silent auction winner is Tricia Tompkins from Perry Ellis. You've got a place to stay in Tuscany. We will be talking to that donor about if she's willing to give a second week, trust me. All right, and then thank you for participating in our major fundraising luncheon and for helping us advance women in leadership. We'll see you all again soon, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.